In July, I went to Edinburgh Pride, and the main reason I went was because the previous year I saw that the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service had got a stand or a stall or something. And I thought, that's outrageous. They shouldn't be there. I'm going to go along and have a chat to them, see if we can get some video footage and talk to them. Just to remind you, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Office's role is to choose who gets prosecuted and who doesn't in criminal courts in Scotland. So it's a very important role, and it's absolutely critical that they seem to be absolutely, utterly neutral. Yes, I went along to Edinburgh Pride, and there they were with a stall festooned with pride flags and LGBT paraphernalia. So I had a chat with the lady, and it went like this. Do you see, from my point of view, that there's controversies in society?
Yeah.
I mean, for example, transgenderism,
yeah.
for example. So that's a controversial issue. I'm on one side. You're demonstrating allegiance to the other side.
We're not demonstrating any allegiance whatsoever. We're saying that our services are accessible to all.
So you're saying you're not demonstrating any allegiance?
We're saying that we are accessible to all people who need our services.
That when I'm someone, this flag represents lots of things that I disagree with.
Well, and that's your prerogative.
But you see why that makes me fear that you're not neutral? Can you point to anything that indicates your sympathy towards social conservatives? People who don't believe the ideology of transgenderism, people who think that homosexual relationships are immoral, people who don't agree with critical race theory. Can you point to anywhere where you've reached out to those people?
Just remember what our role is. We're the Public Prosecution Service for Scotland. So we take information from the police and we decide what happens next, irrespective of who you are, or what your moral code is, or what you believe or what you disbelieve in. That is not our concern as regards our public function.
I'm delighted to hear that, and I absolutely agree that that's your role.
Yeah.
But you not see that the perception is you're undermining your neutrality by aligning yourself with one side of a controversy. You don't see that at all?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, well, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I mean, so where do you go from that? I mean, the bias is as plain as the nose on your face, and yet all she can see is inclusion. It's about making everyone welcome. So what do? I thought I'll write them a letter and see if we can get some sense out of them. So here is my letter. Formal complaint and request for clarification regarding Crown Office participation in Pride events. I'm writing to lodge a formal complaint and to seek clarification about the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service's active participation in the Edinburgh Pride event of 2025, where your organisation hosted a stall within the exhibition area predominantly decorated with Progress Pride flags. As you will be aware, the Progress Pride flag is not merely a symbol of inclusion or diversity, but represents a highly contested set of ideological positions, particularly regarding gender identity and sexuality, that are the subject of live political, legal and cultural debate. Its display by a prosecuting authority raises legitimate and serious concerns about institutional impartiality, especially where the Crown Office may be called upon to make decisions in cases involving matters of belief, free speech or political dissent in this area. This concern is deepened by a recent English High Court ruling which found that the public display of support for Pride events by police forces undermined the perception of their impartiality and potentially violated their legal duties. While this ruling is not binding in Scotland, its reasoning applies with equal force in a Scottish context, particularly for an organisation like COPFS, which is expected to act with the highest standards of neutrality and fairness. So I asked them for an explanation of how they decided to go to the Pride event, what guidelines they have about that, and whether they'll be going next year, basically. So here's the reply. Clarification of our participation in Pride events. While Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service does not have a specific policy covering staff involvement in external events. Well, it's not really staff involvement. It's not as though one of the people happens to go and choose to do something off their own bat at the weekend. This is the organisation itself having a stall at the event, so that seems a bit odd. But anyway, decisions are guided by the Civil Service Code, which sets out standards of integrity, honesty, objectivity and impartiality that must be adhered to. This includes acting in a way that unjustifiably favours or discriminates against particular individuals or interests and reflects the civil service commitment to equality and inclusion. Consequently, attendance at all external events is considered on a case-by-case basis. Well, that's the way of avoiding any serious answer to the question. So they've said that they have to avoid unjustifiably favouring or discriminating against particular individual or interests. That's blatantly what they're doing, but they don't acknowledge it in any way. This reply is basically Swinney speak, isn't it? It's all about procedures, nothing about principles, no genuine engagement with the argument. But I'd just like to point out a little rather comical error they've made in this. So they talk about the Civil Service Code, which sets out the standards of integrity, etc., that must be adhered to. This includes acting in a way that unjustifiably favours or discriminates. It should obviously say this includes not acting in a way that... But anyway, that's just a slip. Anyway, let's carry on looking at their reply. So Edinburgh Pride took place on that date. Since then, there's been the High Court judgment. And then it says, the observations made in the judgment will inform future case-by-case assessments when considering the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Services attendance at events. So I take that as meaning, actually, we won't go again. But not because you're right, but because there's been a court judgment. Okay, I really find this sort of mindset frustrating. The strength of arguments, the truth or falsity, the moral points, all that's just out the window. Just have we followed the procedure? What do the courts say? What do the lawyers say? And that seems to be all we're getting here. Right, last paragraph. Equitable access to the criminal justice system is essential, and Crown Office, Procurator, Fiscal Service plays its part in removing barriers to accessing justice and to our services. I trust this response addresses your concerns. Well, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. It didn't even begin to try to respond to them in a genuine way. Should require anything further, please do not hesitate to contact me. Well, I think there's probably no point. I'll talk about that later. Then look at who's replied. The person who's replied is their equality champion. Now, if your organisation has got an equality champion, that shows that that organisation is signed up for the political philosophy of, I don't know, social justice, whatever you want to call it, diversity, equity, inclusion. So the very fact that this person is called an equality champion indicates that they're committed to a certain way of seeing the world and interpreting these issues, and so that's all we're going to get, because their biased position is official policy. It's not rogue staff, it's official policy. Anyway, so I got that reply, and I think it was even before I got that reply, they were at it again. Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, I follow them on X, and they posted something for International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. So I wrote to them, I'll read you my letter, and that will explain what I thought the problem was. So, dear Sir or Madam, I'm writing to lodge a formal complaint and to seek clarification about the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service's endorsement of International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women 2025. This was manifest in a post on X, and the post on X said, Crown Office supports today's International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. It launches the global campaign 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. The Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain, KC, recently pledged her commitment to victims, and hashtag no excuse. Then there is an image here. International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. I'd like to make it clear that I understand sexual abuse inflicted upon women and children to be the single greatest challenge our justice system faces. She doesn't explain why that is. Okay, the blame for this lies with those responsible for the perpetration of such brutality. It's unacceptable, and victims should feel able to speak out without further fear. Okay, that's from Dorothy Bain. So I went on in my letter. The role of the Crown Office in administering justice in Scotland requires it to hold and to be seen to hold a posture of utter impartiality with regard to every possible issue that impinges on criminal justice. The Crown Office should not have endorsed 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, as obviously it is a form of activism. Activism aims to advance a cause. However noble the cause, an activist mindset introduces motives into the Crown Office decision-making process that are not inherent to the pursuit of justice. For example, if considering a case of violence against a woman by a man alongside a case of violence against women by a woman, I fear the Crown Office's activist position would influence its decision making. Stating a particular emphasis on certain crimes according to the gender of those involved is not compatible with being seen to act fairly, treating every case regardless of the gender of those involved. The Lord Advocate's stern words to perpetrators and promise to victims betrays a bias towards a presumption of guilt on the part of the man. The Crown Office should be promising a fair process and the even-handed pursuit of justice, not expressing generalised condemnation of the men and support for the women. There's no mention of protecting men from false accusations and punishing the women who make them. Any man accused in this area would be reasonable to conclude that the system is skewed against him. The hashtag no excuse is also problematic. A defence in a case might be colloquially termed an excuse. To illustrate, what's your excuse for having sex with her when she was drunk? Reply, she was sober enough to consent. Therefore, no excuse sounds too much like no defence, a denial of a fundamental aspect of justice. Turning now to sentencing, as I understand it, mitigations may apply in any criminal case. While excuse might not be the legal term, the concept is familiar, a factor which diminishes the perpetrator's responsibility for the crime. So actually excuses should be considered in these cases. Defences to justify an action and mitigating factors must be fully considered. The no excuse slogan implies that they might not be. Again, this undermines the perception of neutrality and fairness, causing particular concern to men. As with my complaint to the Crown Office aligning itself with LGBT activism, the Crown Office is now openly aligning itself with the philosophy of the Scottish Government. Again, in this case, that philosophy is feminist, entailing an emphasis on female victimhood and male wrongdoing. A justice system should address wrongdoing regardless of gender. Right, that's quite a strong case. And they replied quite quickly this time. It took them forever to reply. It took a good few prods to get a reply out of them last time. But I had to reply reasonably swiftly. So let's see how they reply to those points, shall we? Dear Mr. Lucas, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence has, since 1991, been globally recognised as a strategy for galvanising support in tackling violence against women and children. Well, it's women and girls, actually, not just children. It's supported internationally by organisations such as the United Nations and the World Health Organization. Does that mean it's politically neutral? Not at all. The United Nations and the World Health Organization are dominated by a secular, progressive, liberal mindset. So they're not a touchstone of neutrality at all. We've recognised violence against women as a global public health crisis of pandemic proportions and a violation of women's human rights. Right, Crown Office takes a robust approach to the prosecution of all forms of abuse and violence against women and children and recognises that anyone, including men, boys and those who are non-binary, can be affected by violence, abuse and sexual offending. Now note what they've said there. They said we take a robust approach to violence against women and children, but we realise other people experience violence as well. It doesn't say they take a robust approach in those cases. So you see, as soon as they sort of break it down into different groups, they're treating the groups differently. They're using different language for different groups. Just avoid the problem and don't divide it up by gender. Right, next bit. It should be noted that the comments you highlighted are gender neutral and do not identify or suggest men as being solely responsible for offending against women and children. That's just not true. That is totally wrong. Because in what they published, they talked about gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is violence of males against females. That's what gender-based violence is taken to mean. So the whole context we're talking about here, they presented it within the context of gender-based violence. So it absolutely is about men offending and women and girls being the victims. So I mean, how they can put that as the reply, I really do not know. Right. Similarly, the attribution of blame for this offending is directed towards those who perpetrate these offences, not to the accused, those accused of defending. Well, I'm not so sure about that. If you say there's no excuse, at what point is that a relevant thing to say? That's a relevant thing to say when a person's trying to defend themselves, not when they've been convicted. So I don't accept that, and are again framed as being gender neutral in recognition that the commission of these offences is not restricted to one gender. But it's not framed as gender neutral, it's been framed in the headline as about gender-based violence. So again, total failure to engage with the real issue and just replying in like Swinney-esque procedure bureaucratic talk. Will I bother replying to them? To be honest, no, I don't want to waste taxpayers' money. I don't want someone having to be paid to sit there mulling over how to write another bland reply that doesn't say anything, that gets checked by 3 lawyers before it gets sent. Because I think probably the people looking at it, they're probably so ingrained in this ideology that they're not capable of seeing it from a different point of view. Or maybe they can, but they obviously will be scared to say so while they're at work. But what I will do, I'll drop them an email and just send a link to this video. I think almost everyone who works in these organisations, they'll assume that everyone thinks their way, so there's not really any need to have a rethink or to reevaluate any of their stances. Now in Scotland, the SNP government gets its tentacles into everything it funds, infusing its ideology and promoting its proponents. Now what does that result in? Well, it results in biased organisations and services, as we've seen here. And it also results in an indoctrinated workforce. And a huge number of people work for the government, so you've got huge swathes of the population who have been inducted into liberal, progressive, secular thinking as though it's synonymous with professionalism. Right, thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.